Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Central. So I'd like to welcome you to our August WonderChat. My name is Missy Hicks. I'm your host for today, but I am also one of the co-founders of Wonders and Worries and the director of the registered Wonders and Worries Provider Program. So I'm so glad you're able to join us today. I think our topic, unmasking and managing anxiety in an ongoing pandemic, is obviously, hopefully, really timely for everyone. You know, as we've gone through months and months and months of walking through this pandemic, I find it really hard to imagine that someone hasn't experienced anxiety on some level, either personally, professionally, now educationally, just so many things. And I think our whole world is in such an upheaval that it has to be overwhelming. So hopefully that Kim and Karim can share some strategies to help children especially cope with the anxiety of this long ongoing pandemic. So before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. If you've joined us before, you know that we have the Q&A feature. So I will monitor that. I'll watch the questions, and if I feel like it's important to jump in there and ask it at that moment, I certainly will do that. So I'll manage that and triage those questions for Kim and Corinne as we go through. The recorded webinar and any supplemental materials will be uploaded to our website probably by Sunday, definitely by Monday. And so we will have that there for you to look at as well. Both Kim and Corinne have shared some wonderful resources, so those will be available for you to look at and download from the site. Next, the evaluations and PDUs. As always, and I know I talk about this all the time, we really do appreciate your feedback regarding our Wonder Chats. We want to use that feedback to build a program that's really meeting your needs. And I was just telling Kim and Corinne, I'm so excited. It's kind of crazy the things that make me excited these days, that there's a new feature, I think in an update that came with our webinar platform, that an evaluation will pop up in your browser when you leave the meeting. So I would certainly appreciate if you, when you see that pop up, take a couple minutes just to answer. There's just 3 or 4 questions on there to give us some feedback. I'd really appreciate that. And then if you miss that pop-up, on Saturday, as usual, you'll get an email that has a link to the evaluation and also a link to find the store to purchase the post-assessments in case you need PDU hours. So those will come on Saturday. If you've already done it today, the evaluation today when it pops up, no need to do it again, just one will be great. And then for our PDU process, we have the PDUs available. You can always listen for free at no charge just for personal growth. But if you do need PDU credit, you can go to our store and purchase the post-assessment. Take that assessment. When you're successful with that, the certificate with your name will be emailed to you. At the end of this presentation, the QR code that you'll see will link you right to that place in case you want to purchase the post-assessment. As a reminder, today is just we have an hour and a half. We put a little bit of extra time to ensure we got through all this content. So just want to let you know that again. And I would like to welcome you and welcome our speakers. I am thrilled to have Corinne and Kim both. They are child life specialists, clinical people at Wonders and Worries, and they are going to share with us today a wealth of information on how to help walk through these challenging times. Kim?
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you. So I want to just lay out how we're going to tackle this topic. And there is so much that we could cover, and we did add that half hour just to give time for Q&A. But this is how we're going to tackle it. We are unmasking anxiety in children and teens by focusing on this acronym that we've created, with the M representing the mind-body connection. So how can I help a child or teen understand fear, anxiety, and stress responses and make sense of that mind-body connection? The A represents assessing and accessing anxiety. So determining, as child life specialists, what is contributing to a child's or teen's anxiety and how can I help them name it, or coaching parents in doing that with their children. And then the S represents support, structure, and stress relief. So what tools and activities are available to help facilitate coping and create coping plans with children and teens. And then the K represents know your limits. Where does our role as child life specialists end, and when should I encourage parents to seek additional support for their children? So let's jump in. Looking at that mind-body connection. I want to start with just differentiating between fear and anxiety. Because they're often talked about at the same time, and there are certainly similarities and overlap, but what differentiates them, with fear, fear is present-based. Fear is happening now in the moment. It's immediate. And it's coming from the limbic system and the sensory cortex, as you can see on that diagram on the slide. So the limbic system is that lower part of the slide with the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. And so that whole area represents the limbic system. And honestly, I could like geek out on the neuroscience of all of that, but we don't have time to go into the detail. But I really do encourage you, if you haven't focused on the neuroscience in a while or ever, to do that, to really dive in and understand all those different parts of the limbic system and how they contribute to reactions. So fear is present-based, happening now, and that limbic system, there are components for memory, emotions, homeostasis, and hormones. And then the other piece of fear is the brainstem, the oldest part of our brain, where that fight, flight, freeze, faint reaction lives. And when we're threatened and we immediately respond with that fear response, that's what will happen. It will engage our brainstem, that fight, flight, freeze, faint, and the limbic system. So our sensory cortex is taking in information and alerting us, it's time to react. And it's all survival based. So when we think about anxiety, what is different about anxiety? Well, anxiety is future-based. It tends to be more sustained. So not like an immediate thing that when the threat is past, it passes, but it's more sustained in thinking about the potential of what could happen or could something happen again. It involves many areas of the brain and multiple brain areas interacting, but it does trigger the amygdala, and the key component comes from the limbic system, where our amygdala is saying there's something to be aware of, there's a potential threat, or there is a threat. And so the amygdala is triggered and engaged, and it affects our psychological, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive responses. So it's a whole brain triggering the amygdala. And so there's lots of examples of how we could think about this, but one that happened recently in my world, I'll share. So we're in Texas, we're in Austin. My mom lives about 30 miles north, and which is wonderful for me and for her, but she loves to hike, and there are rattlesnakes in Texas. And so not long ago, she thought she had come across a rattlesnake. She was hiking and she saw a snake on the trail. That fear response kicked in. She was very frightened. She stopped. She got her composure, watched the snake for a while, realized it never moved. Another hiker came along. They investigated further and determined that the snake was dead, and somebody had pulled it out onto the trail, I think, to warn people. So her fear response, she got control of that. But then, of course, she had a lot of anxiety about going hiking again and the possibility of coming across another rattlesnake or another dangerous snake. And so my mom has a lot of wonderful coping tools, and so she did a lot of different things. She basically accessed the cognitive parts of her brain and thinking through, let me learn about snakes. She added a walking stick to her routine. She bought some snake chaps that can protect her ankles, and then she was aware of that trigger. Just as she's hiking, she may have a sudden reaction because her brain is telling her, wait a minute, there could be a snake there. So she's been able to continue to hike with a little bit of anxiety as she does it. So that's just one example of the difference between fear and anxiety. The last point is that anxiety and fear are contagious, and they're designed to be that way. If my brain and body recognize a threat, I want to, one, access support, potentially, unless I want to hide and be really quiet. But most of the time, I want to access support. I want to figure out who's here that can help me. And I want to alert others. I want our whole species to survive. And anxiety is the same way, because it's the amygdala saying, I think there's a threat. You need to be on the alert. And so all of the things about us, how we're wired, our brain and our body, is designed to let others know, I'm anxious and I want you to be anxious too, because we need to work together with this threat. So what's really interesting right now in this time of pandemic, and we all know as child life specialists, You all are helping children cope with fear and anxiety all the time. It's what we do. Whether it's, a child in fear in the midst of a procedure or something painful or a trauma in the ER, we're helping them cope with that. Then we're helping them cope with the anxiety of that needs to happen again or what's going to happen next. But we're able to maintain, or we do our best to maintain our calm and to find our ability to manage our own anxiety and not react and kind of join them in that state. But in a pandemic, what we're seeing is everybody's affected. And like Missy was mentioning, all of us are affected in some way or another. And so it makes it more challenging. And many of the parents that I know we're working with, their anxiety is heightened. So everyone's anxiety in the home is heightened. Teachers' anxieties are heightened as they're starting something new. So that's just something that's really important for all of us to be aware of. Like I said, I could talk about the brain and everything forever, but I'm just going to move on. And I want to focus specifically on some of the things that we all know, some specific examples of fear and anxiety that we're seeing with children. And specifically, Corinne and I are going to relate this to school and transition to online school or in-person school, whatever that looks like. But some of the fears, don't stick that Q-tip in my nose, that fear of I'm needing to go through this test right now and there's pain involved. That fear of separation, I'm afraid to leave my place of comfort and predictability and support. And what's really interesting when we think about fear, that it's that survival reaction. And one component of that survival reaction is having my needs met and being cared for. And for children, that absolutely includes the trusted adults who will protect me and feed me and take care of me. And so separation can truly be a fear response if the brain gets to that place where I'm in survival mode. And if I separate from this person who's cared for me, I'm going to respond with fear. The other really interesting thing that even as I was preparing this presentation with Corinne, I was thinking about, our brains don't automatically recognize COVID-19 as a threat, right? It's a microscopic virus that if we walk out into the world, we don't have that sense of, oh, it might be there. We didn't have that initially when it first kind of came into, our general area. And so we've had to kind of teach ourselves to be aware and to be concerned. And we've kind of had to force that reaction of, I need to be worried. There are germs that can be dangerous and I need to wear my mask and wash my hands. And we've been working with children to do the same. And so now it's that unique balance of we need to be worried and aware, but we don't want to be too worried so that we can't function day to day, so that we can't leave our homes if we've determined that it's safe to do so. So that's a really unique situation that we haven't likely experienced in the same way before. So these are some of the things that we're seeing with our clients. The other piece I want to mention that's really important and something that we do all the time is normalize. Anxiety is normal. It is meant to protect us. And so the shift, the goal should not be to be anxiety-free. Certainly at this point in time in this pandemic. But if we shift our goal to, my goal is to be able to manage anxiety, to manage my anxiety, to help children and teens manage their anxiety, and to see it as a call to action. That when I'm experiencing anxiety, that means I need to utilize a coping tool. I need to recognize what's happening and I need to be called to action, whatever that might look like to manage my anxiety. Okay, so now I want to share a video. One of the wonderful things, and we've talked about this on the WonderChats, I know that so many amazing resources out there. So many resources are being shared. So this video is new to us, and it's one that one of our other staff members found fairly recently, and we were all like, oh my gosh, we love it. And so I want to share it with you in case you haven't come across it, from Anxiety Canada. And here we go.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
Okay, so I find that really helpful and something that I haven't shared that personally with a teen yet, but I can definitely see that being beneficial to share with tweens or teens and with parents. There's also, Anxiety Canada has a very similar video for younger children. So if you like that video, check out the video that they have for younger children. And I also want to mention a resource that Mary Pat mentioned during our last WonderChat last month, the book Hey Warrior. After that WonderChat, many of us Wonders and Worries went and ordered more books, and we love books and resources. But Hey Warrior does a wonderful job of educating about anxiety, and what I love is how it presents anxiety as a protector. It's there to protect us, and I just think that's really a wonderful way to look at anxiety.
Kim, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I think it popped back to the other version of the screen. Do you go back to the full slideshow? And I think that will also help with your mic. Your mic is a little sounding off.
Gotcha. Okay, let me try. Is that better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Is my mic okay?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So another resource that I want to share that we've been using for quite a while, and many of you may be familiar with it, but if you're not, we definitely want to let you know about it. Dr. Dan Siegel, he created this hand model of the brain. And there's a YouTube link. I'm not going to show this video, but I encourage you to watch it. And if you like the video that we linked here, you can Google other Dan Siegel hand models of the brain. And he has a variety of videos where he talks about it at different lengths of time. So the idea is to use our hand to teach about how the brain works, and really this idea of our lower brain and our limbic system and what happens. So you can see here on the diagram, I'm going to kind of show you. I know my video is a little bit maybe hard to see, it's small, but the idea is that our arm represents the spinal cord, and then as we come in here to the wrist, this is our lower brain. This is our fight, flight, freeze response. And then if we fold our thumb into the inside, this is our limbic system. And our limbic system, another way to talk about it is it's appraising the environment and determining whether something is good or bad. So this is representing our limbic system, our thumb is, and then we fold our fingers down over the limbic system. And if we were looking sideways, this is kind of a side view of the brain, this represents our cortex. And all of those, the prefrontal cortex, problem solving skills, integration skills. So, and I often use the term like online, when our cognitive skills are online. And so what's wonderful about this model is we can talk about how if something, certainly anxiety or fear, overwhelms our system, we can, what Dr. Siegel calls, flip our lid, which means we no longer have access to that problem-solving part of our brain, and we are functioning fully from our limbic system and our reptilian brain. And so we need to use our tools, our coping tools, or people around us need to help us use our coping tools to bring that cortex back online. Now, this isn't just with anxiety. The hand model of the brain can be used with any type of emotion, strong emotion. We've used it a lot when we're talking to children about if they get really upset or frustrated. Use it a lot with parents to help them recognize, you know, if you as a parent are flipping your lid or about to, that's a time when you need to take a break, when you need to have some self-awareness. I know in my family, with all the closeness, and we have 2 teenagers, we've all had moments in time where we have flipped our lid and realized, you know what, or not always realized, we need to take a break from this debate or whatever is happening, and remind each other, let's take a break and come back to it. And so doing the things that we'll be talking about can bring that that cortex back online. So it's a great tool. I hope you utilize it. I know we've loved it at Wonders and Worries. So I want to shift and talk about stress. We've been talking about fear and anxiety, and let's talk a little bit about stress and how that relates. Another resource that we love at Wonders and Worries is the book, Be the Boss of Your Stress. It looks like this. Some of you may be aware it's a series, and there's Be the Boss of Your Pain and Be the Boss of Your Sleep. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend it. So this is just one page that focuses on teaching about stress. And of course, as child life specialists, this is what we do. We teach, we educate, we help children understand what is going on with your body. And so I want to reiterate how we are very, very well suited to address anxiety and fear and stress in children and teens in the midst of this pandemic. We've done it in the hospital setting on a daily basis, and we can apply it to our community-based setting, whatever that looks like, whether you're in a community-based setting or not, like we are. So what is stress? So on this blurb on the right, it talks about stress is our body's reaction to things that worry you or make you feel unsure. When you are upset or anxious about something, your body produces adrenaline and other energy-boosting chemicals, and then it talks about what happens in our body. So stress is basically the response to a stimuli. It's the response to fear and anxiety, but it's also the response to other things. It's the response to change. It's a response to the unknown. It's a byproduct of fear and anxiety, and it's a byproduct of all of those other things. And we know stress is healthy. It's necessary. It can be very healthy. We need it to provide a boost of healthy energy to do things, to motivate us, to prepare for things. But over time, and when we don't have the coping tools, it can become very unhealthy. And so long-term stress, which is what, of course, we are all dealing with in the midst of this pandemic, really tests our coping tools and really tests and calls to action, hopefully, us needing to add to our coping tools and helping the patients or clients that we serve add to theirs. So long-term stress can cause the body, mind, or spirit to be out of balance, and it can interfere with daily life. A couple other things I want to mention about stress. It's that key place. I think we can all think about times when our coping system was overwhelmed by the amount of stress in our life. And there was something on the radio just yesterday when I was driving that the radio announcer was talking about the 2nd season of Tiger King coming on and saying that he didn't think he could watch it because it reminded him too much of the 1st season of Tiger King, which he watched in the very beginning of the pandemic when it felt so overwhelming about what was happening. And it may still feel really overwhelming to many people, but for many of us, we've adapted and we're coping, right? And when we think back to those early days when we didn't have our coping tools in place yet, that's a very different feeling that you can identify with. Whoa, I don't want to go back to that place. place when my ability to cope hadn't kept up with the stressors that were coming into my world. And then the last thing I'll say about stress is that there was a wonderful article I love following all the resources, but the ACLP's Facebook page, they had an article from the New York Times that talked about creating narratives during this time, but also recognizing that when we're in the midst of stress, we can't step back and create that narrative a lot of times, and we can't make meaning yet. Like some people may be like making meaning and recognizing all of these things that are coming out of this pandemic, but other people are not at all able to do that. They're in the midst of trying to deal with that day-to-day, how do I cope and how do I stay kind of out of that survival mode. And for many, it has been survival mode at different points in time. Just making sure they have the resources, or survival mode, certainly if they've contracted the virus. So let me move on and talk a little bit more. So this slide, I'm not going to spend much time here, but it just represents all of the systems that are impacted when we talk about stress. It's all systems in our body, from our endocrine system, our digestive system, our excretory system, respiratory system, cardiovascular system, and our nervous system. And with our nervous system, I think it's really important to recognize that sympathetic nervous system, if it's operating, then our parasympathetic nervous system that self-regulates that cortex part of the brain is not available when our sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze, faint, takes over. So this slide can be used just a reminder of kind of stepping through, and actually we're going to do that now. I'm going to share an activity that we do that steps through thinking about that mind-body connection. So this comes from Art with Heart's Ink About It workbook. It's one of the workbooks that we love to use, and the page itself is a little difficult to see. So I've pulled out, on the left you see emotions listed, and on the right you see reactions listed. And the way we often use this page in the book is to talk about the different emotions and identify what they are. And then children can choose different feelings that represent those emotions for them, or teens can choose different feelings. And then on the right-hand side, identifying reactions that a child or teen has had or is having related to that emotion. And so drawing circles in the same color to match, and then putting X's on the little body in the middle, or coloring in that part of the body to just show where in the body we're having that reaction. And the reactions can be really helpful in terms of just helping children and teens realize, oh, this is a stress reaction. This is a reaction to the worried thoughts that I'm having. Whether that's faster breathing or a tight throat, whether that's ears ringing or a headache. An example of a time that I used this recently, I had been working with a little girl. She's almost 8 years old. We worked with her prior to the pandemic and then in the midst of the pandemic. And her mom called me urgently and said, we need an emergency session because she's having such severe stomach pain and she can't function. And so instead of just jumping right into that emergency session, I talked the mom through what she could do, because I knew she had the tools and just needed to have some success in using those tools. And so I kind of stepped her through a similar, a modified version of this activity, but where she could focus with her daughter on what was happening with her body and then start to connect it to feelings that this little girl was experiencing. And what was happening is this little girl was in 2 virtual camps. One was a bereavement camp, because this family had lost a baby in utero 2 years prior. And then the other was Camp Kesem, which is a camp for children who have a parent with cancer. And this is a mom who's been battling cancer but is currently stable, but there's still a risk. And so those 2 camps, it was a lot for this little girl to be focusing on. And she was able to identify it was too much and able to voice, I want to drop the bereavement camp and not continue with it. So that's what they did. And her stomach ache symptoms resolved. And then when we did do a check-in session the following week, she was feeling great, which is actually, as we move into, let me move into this next section around assessing and accessing anxiety. Sometimes it can be hard to access, to help children to assess and help them access what's going on related to anxiety if they're not feeling it in that moment. So when I met with this little girl, she was in a really great place, and we revisited it a little bit, but she didn't really need to. And what a wonderful thing that her mom was able to manage that So assessing and accessing anxiety. So here's just a list of some of the things that we've been seeing, and to talk a little bit about specifically about school. And let me update you on what's happening in our world in Texas, in Austin specifically, in San Antonio. We have offices there. Many schools have started with online school, and most schools are doing online school for at least a period of time, most for 3 weeks, and then potentially offering in person. For those that are offering in person, there's a choice to continue with online or to go in person. But there are several larger school districts that haven't started yet with online. They're starting on September 8th. So we're a little all over the place, which I imagine all of you are too, with some starting, some not. And so we've been thinking about the different reactions that our client families are having with the online school at home and all the stressors. So there's kind of a list of some of the things that children and tweens and teens and parents have been telling us are creating anxiety, and then going to school in person and starting to think about what that might look like. So an example, I call this the tale of two kindergartners. I've had the privilege of working with parents recently, and definitely over the last couple months, and doing parenting classes. And so there were two parents that were describing kind of the opposite circumstance. So one parent who's very immunocompromised, has a kindergarten little boy starting kindergarten. He's been so excited about kindergarten all last year in pre-K, all summer, and he wants to go to kindergarten. And for their family, that's not the safest choice for them, and they've chosen that he'll do online school, at least for the foreseeable future. But he's problem solving because he's thought about all the things that they've talked about to keep him safe. And so he's trying to convince his mom that he can go to kindergarten because he can wear his mask and he can wash his hands and he won't touch his face and he'll do all the things. And so his mom's trying to help him understand that even with doing those things, there's still some risk because of her situation. So that's one story. And then another story is a mom who is finishing up her treatment for breast cancer, and she has a kindergarten daughter. And this mom is a teacher. She's planning to teach online because of her risk, but she's needing for her children to go to school in person so she can do her job. And her kindergarten daughter does not want to go to school. Her kindergarten daughter is feeling very anxious about separating from her mom, and is also very anxious about being exposed to the virus, to bringing it home to her mom. And so they're working on a plan to help everybody feel less anxious, to manage their anxiety with kind of a re-entry plan back into the home after children have been at school. So this is the Be the Boss of Your Stress book again. This is one way that we love to assess anxiety at Wonders and Worries, and it's a little bit of a twist on a more typical thermometer reading scale that all of you may be familiar with. But what I love about it is how it separates the body, the mind, and the spirit into 3 separate components. And so having children assess how does your body feel, separate from assessing how does your mind feel, and then separate from assessing how does your spirit feel. And so with the mind, it's 10 would be mostly positive, helpful thoughts and feelings like happiness, pride, and confidence, where at the low end, at a 0, you have mostly negative or unhelpful thoughts and feelings like anger, sadness, and boredom. And then on the spirit side, I think this is really key right now, just that connectedness. How are we able to achieve that connectedness? So the idea is a 10 would be you feel connected to others, culture, or a higher power, such as God. And a 0 would be you feel lonely, out of touch, like life doesn't have meaning. So this could be one tool that can really help us assess what's happening for a child or a teen. So an activity idea that we've loved, and this works really well in a virtual world, this was done on a whiteboard with many of the video platforms have a whiteboard that can be interactive. And so the child life specialist was just directing the child to draw a pie and create 8 pieces of the pie. And then with each piece of pie, identify a stressor for each piece. And then to color in each piece to show how much stress that particular stressor is causing. And this can really give us insight. So you can see, and I think this pie is really representative of a lot of what we've seen. So not being able to go places, COVID-19, it's crazy and people have died. This is Izzy, she's very stressful, so that's a sibling who's creating stress. The dog's peeing on the floor, mom's diagnosis, Camp Kesem was canceled in person, they could do virtual, there's too little to do, it's boring, and then getting in trouble when it's not my fault. And so we might kind of think, or a parent might kind of think, well, probably the most challenging is not being able to go places, or maybe it's the boredom. But for this child, it was her sibling being very stressful to her. So it's a great way to start to assess what is the most stressful, and then let's look at the coping tools. And so around on the outside, she's listed coping tools, and this is a child that we've been working with that fortunately already had some great coping tools in place, but we're always needing to kind of assess, are they working for the current circumstances? So one other assessment idea that I want to share, and then I'm going to pass it to Corinne. So this is a way to really think about the different areas of well-being. And Corinne's going to be talking more about specifically structuring, but this is around just assessing. What am I getting in each of these areas, and what am I lacking in each of these areas? And so the way we would utilize this activity, and it doesn't look very exciting here, I'll just say, like all of us can make it a little more exciting if we're doing this with a tween or teen or an older school age child. I've utilized this mainly with parents as just a way to teach them to kind of do this with their children. But the idea is that the child or teen would rate each area on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being they're getting everything they need in that area. And so as we think about these different areas, what I think is really important is that they're all, there's little nuances. So of course, family time with family. Connecting time would be time connecting to others, whether that's peers or other people outside of the family, support people. Playtime, we know that as child life specialists, but that's meant to be child-directed or teen-directed play. Or for us adults, it could be creativity time, things that we enjoy doing. Time in is self-reflective time. It's self-care time. It might be meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness. For children, it may be very simple, like a quiet time for younger children. And then, of course, sleep time we understand, but we also understand that it can be very disrupted as we're going through all these transitions. And then physical activity, very key. That may be something that's a component of playtime, but it may not. Playtime might be playing with Legos or coloring, and there's not big motor activity going on. And then focus time. So focus time is, that would be the school time, or that would be maybe a time learning, it would be work time. It would be, I'm learning piano. And so like right now with school starting, we know we don't have a lot of control around focus time, but we need to recognize how it might throw other things out of balance. And then downtime is just that kind of veg time. It might be, the binge watching time, or the scrolling through social media, or playing video game time. And at least in my home, I've noticed that downtime has been something that's kind of taken over, at least for my teenage son. And that's something, that we want to manage. So the key here is, and we know this as child life specialists, so anytime we have a transition, and now we're transitioning within a pandemic with school starting, it's a really beneficial time to reassess what's happening in all of these areas, and then implement various ways to cope. So I will turn it over to Corinne. Corinne, I'm going to give control to you.
Thanks, Kim.
Excuse me one second. While Kim and Corinne are transitioning the control, I want to remind people, if you do have questions, go ahead and type those into the Q&A box, because then I can watch for those, and then we'll have those available at the end to be able to have both Kim and Corinne address any questions you might have. Thanks. Sorry, Corinne.
No worries. Thanks. Oh, there we go. Thanks, guys. Hi, I'm Corinne. I am a child life specialist at Wonders and Worries with Kim, and I am also a marriage and family therapist in private practice. And thank you so much, Kim, for starting us off and explaining anxiety and fear, and it's so important in the neurobiology stuff. I'm a big geek about that, so I will be throwing some of that back at you today. So my job with you today is to basically just focus on the first thing, the S, the support, and how we provide that to kids and families. So what I wanted to start with is the question that I ask a lot of parents who I start working with, and I say, how do you connect with your children? What are the things and activities that you do to provide connection where children can feel vulnerable and share feelings? And sometimes parents have a hard time coming up with those things. You know, and what Kim was saying earlier is checking in with your own nervous system and how that's doing. I'm sure some of you, child life specialists, have walked into a hospital room to help a kiddo, and the parent you notice is really anxious. So sometimes you're trying to maintain that parent's anxiety, your own, and help the child at the same time. So I was able to go to a conference earlier this year around grief and loss. And there was a speaker there. Her name is Robin Gobble. I don't know if I said that her last name correctly, but she's a social worker and a registered play therapist. And she brought up the idea of neuroception. And what that is essentially subconsciously the idea of what is happening in our brain, but we don't know it's happening. So the amygdala that Kim was speaking of is essentially, it's our watchtower. It's checking in to see if we're safe or not safe and scanning every like 4 seconds. So she talks about how there's 3 places where we cue for safety. The inside, which is what's going on with our heart rate and our breathing. That's why I love that activity that Kim shared about figuring out your feelings and connecting it with your body's reaction. The 3rd cue for safety is the outside environment. So we typically know where all the doors are when we enter a building and how to get out. And then there's the in-between. And that is the space between the electrical energy of you and who you're with. And so just trying to help parents pay attention to how they connect and what their energy level is like when they're with their child. And these are just some fun prompts with kids, what kids love to hear, just to kind of start us off. I don't know if anyone, I'm not a TikToker, but I know that right now it's really big in the TikTok world, the challenge, the cuddle challenge with your toddler. And if you haven't seen any of the videos, I would suggest just looking that up, because it is just a challenge where parents are cuddling with their child, just kind of come and surprise them and lay down with them as they're watching their favorite show. And it's really fun to see the reactions of how parents are connecting with their kids just by being still, not talking, and just being in the same space as their kids. And just like child life specialists and mental health professionals, we have to check our anxiety at the door before we enter with a child or work with a family. Sorry guys, I'm trying to figure out how to change. There we go. Okay, so like Kim said, a lot of this presentation we're focusing on how we support kids at home who are choosing to do the virtual route of school, and then who are actually going back to school in person. And I know that everyone is different right now wherever you are, but we just wanted to think about some ways that maybe you could help some children depending on what their routine would be. So some of the things we were thinking about were, you know, how can we make some normalcy in supporting at home? I know on Facebook I've seen a lot of parents just getting virtual spaces together and making sure that if it's possible to have privacy in the home, great. If you have multiple kiddos, like how are we going to maneuver all these kids on laptops and just creating a comfortable space with everything that child needs in front of them? The simplest thing is packing a lunch like you would if you went to school and brought your lunch to school. I've seen a lot of really great first day photos and pictures and still maintaining those traditions, even though it's not the same right now. Parents leaving notes of encouragement around the home on a Post-it to help kids just, you know that they're there and they're thinking about them, even if that parent is in another room having to work. And this is really big, gaining endpoint and giving choices. You know, things are going to be different, and just asking kids, you know, hey, what do you think about this? Do you think this is going to be a good choice, or do you think this is going to be a good choice? And then experimenting. I use that word a lot with families, like, let's do an experiment. Let's maybe just figure out and try it. And if we don't like it, hey, we can try something else. You know, connecting to peers. I know our clients at Wonders and Worries right now are struggling because their parents have immunosuppressed immune systems, and they're not able to go and let up on the social distancing rules right now, just I'm sure as kids who are dealing with their own illness or having the same issue. So how do they stay connected? Is it FaceTime? Is it writing letters? You know, what can we do for kids to still have the relationships with their friends, even though they can't be in person? And then maybe shifting a little bit to school. So identifying support staff who kids can go to if they're struggling, if they need to talk with someone, creating a coping kit. So what are the things and tools that kids can take with them One of the easiest ones that I like to do with kids is a little breathing stick. So all you need is a pipe cleaner and some pony beads. And what I do with kids with this one, and you can do it incognito, like under your desk, is you just do your breaths and you have to slow them down. So you do a big breathe in, then you hold it, and then you breathe out. And the idea is not to do it really fast, but to go really slow. So this is a really good breathing tool that I like to have in my back pocket for kids in their backpack. Create a support plan together, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Mask protocol and fashion. I was working with a teen earlier last week, and she has really big, fluffy, beautiful curly hair. And she was having a lot of anxiety about how her mask would fit for so long and how she would look, because she's a teenager and she cares about, you know, how she looks. So she was a little worried about that. So that was part of our session, is how to manage that anxiety and still stay safe and wear her mask. We saw a really good tip from some other parents to kind of help prepare kids to wear a mask for such a long time, that if they're at home and having screen time, a new rule or a new experiment is to wear your mask for the entire time that you're having screen time, just to get used to it. And then one of the last ones I just want to mention is giving permission to grade losses. So for all those teens who are not getting their back to school dances and their proms and their sports, just making sure that we support and validate that it's normal to feel that way and to grieve those things together. So these are just some ways, some support plans that we've created. I did these actually on an app called Over, O-V-E-R, and it's a really easy one to maneuver. So we thought about how can we help kids when they're worried or anxious at school, and let's just create a plan and think through, if this were to happen, you know, what's our game plan? So we thought maybe just thinking about how would we help a kid notice if they're having a tough time at school? You know, does that mean they're having a hard time focusing, or are they sweating and they're perspiring and we know that's how they're getting anxious? And then if they notice those things, what are the things that they can try? And having 3 key things that they can have to attempt to do to see if it can alleviate any anxiety. So a lot of times for kids and for adults, you know, with our brain and when our prefrontal pops up, we can't think through this plan. So a lot of times what I do for kids is we do this, I have them cut it out, and then I have them put it in their backpack and then take it to school so they can look at it, they can know what their plan is, and then attempt to try some of these things. And I know a lot of our kids, sometimes you can add this one. We sometimes put down, I don't want people to know. If that kiddo is not wanting to know their parent is sick or has cancer. I know one girl I'm working with right now, she didn't want, her mom's a teacher, and she didn't want her classmates to know her mom wasn't teaching her this year, and why. Because kids were asking questions over the Zoom call and she was getting really anxious. So we just practiced some language for her to use if certain questions came up for her. And the next one is just, you know, my support plan at home. Same things. If I'm at home, what do I notice if I'm struggling? If I can't pay attention or I'm having a hard time looking at my screen, these are the 3 things that I can do. And who can I ask for help? And I know this is a big one right now because a lot of parents are either at home working and can't be disturbed, you know, and ways to think through how to problem solve. And then when do I really like knock on that door and say like, Mom, like I need help. Okay. All right. I stole this picture from one of our staff members. This was a really good representation of a virtual space. I like that Ellie had her lunch, her water, she had all of her markers and pens, she had a really cool Barbie doll to the right. I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe it was a toy, maybe it was a distraction tool, I don't know. But I thought this was a really good representation. She looks comfy, she has her pillows, and I think her schedule is in the corner. So we're gonna talk a little bit about structure and maybe thinking through some ways how you can help families create that at home right now. Because as child life specialists, as therapists, we know, and as adults, like I need structure because I struggle if I don't have it. So I think one of the main things that we can remember right now is we do not need all the answers to get started. like I said, we can try some experiments and be very fluid and see if things work, and then shift gears if they don't. So this is another thing I stole from a staff member at the very beginning of COVID during March. This is a really fun structured routine that she put up on the wall. And I liked it because they were in like 1 hour increments and 30-minute increments. And it seemed pretty feasible for her kids. And she has 4 and they're all different age groups. So she really needed to have the structure put in place so she could work and so could her husband. You know, I think reminding everybody, and for kids, flexibility is going to be the word of the year. How do we stay flexible? How do we figure out what to do if something isn't working? Visuals are great, so letting kids and teens help create one. I think Kim had told me earlier that she saw a meme that, why did anyone buy a 2020 calendar? Because we're having a hard time putting anything fun on it, but we can find fun things to put on it. It just might not be vacations to Fiji, but we can find some good things. And we're going to talk through some ways that maybe you can think through some theme nights and things for your kids to have some fun. Having structure will allow less questions about what's next and, you know, looking at the schedule. Fun fact, so I use this with a lot of my ADHD kiddos, that we have our iPhones and our clocks on our phone. And when kids are learning how to tell time, it's really tough to look at your iPhone and think, oh, I have 20 more minutes before I go to my lunch. So having an analog clock is really helpful for kids to learn time, and it's easier for gauging. All right. So, and before I step into this too, at the very end of this presentation, there will be a link to something called First Aid for Feelings workbook. And it is one of, I just went through it a few days ago. It's amazingly written, I think, by a nurse. And it has some great ideas for structure for kids to make like a play day, and some wonderful ways to create a calming corner for kids, which kind of goes into our self-care ideas for the rest of our time. But look into that, look at it. It has some really great ideas at the very end. So we're going to shift into stress relief, which I think we all need this right now. So if I encourage each and every one of you today to maybe just jot down this for yourself and maybe think through, you know, what are your stressors? What do you notice? And what are some ideas that you can do for yourself? So I really liked, I think I found this idea on Pinterest, and the idea and the difference between self-care and self-management practice. And so self-care is those things that we do to make our mind and body feel better. It's the bubble baths, it's the listening to music, it's the going for walks in nature, those types of things. And our self-management is, you know, keeping our schedule, keeping our room clean, our virtual space clean, going to the grocery store, making sure that we have food so we can cook. Whereas if I had a really awful week of not managing my food, I like end up eating out, and that's not good because I don't like to do that. So helping kids think through, they don't have another way to think through what they're doing at home and how to cope. So I like to shift into also the brain and our chemicals. So we know dopamine is our reward chemical. So when we complete a task, when we do self-care, these are all the things that we do that releases dopamine that we need. So I'm a big list maker, so I get a rush of dopamine if I cross something off a list, and that helps me. And I think celebrating little wins is going to be really important for kids right now, that the smallest things can induce dopamine and help that chemical release for them, and we need it. So thinking about self-care ideas, serotonin, we know that right now we're inside a lot. In Texas, it's over 100 degrees, so it's really tough to do things outside and get those walks in. So I know people have been going in my neighborhood early in the morning or later at night just because they need to get outside and get their body moving. So I know kids right now and teens are really sedentary. There's a lot of talk about video games and how it is a social outlet for a lot of people right now, and that's great. We need that, but also how do we get our body moving? So I know a lot of kids, even me at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go do anything. I just want to sit here because I'm so tired, but I know that I need to go walk and get it going. And then oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And I think right now that one's really important to talk about, because one of the biggest ways we get that is through hugging and through giving our families hugs and our friends hugs. And we're not able to do that safely right now. So how do we get oxytocin released if we can't hug and be around people? So one of the biggest ways that you also can do that is to give compliments and also to hug a pet. So I have a bulldog and he's pretty stout and I give him lots of hugs. And I've noticed that I do that a lot throughout the day. If I'm having a tough day, I just go and give him a hug. So maybe helping kids identify stuffed animals that they love that they maybe want to give a hug today, or have a chart around this one gets a hug today. And then I also found these at World Market. So they're thank you for existing Post-it notes. And they're by someone named Emily McDowell. And they're really fun Post-its that say things like, I'm so lucky to know you, you're a straight up gift to humanity. And they're really kind of fun ones and I like them. So I would suggest, or plain Post-its are fine for giving compliments too. Okay, so as we continue, so thinking outside the screen, I know that after a long day of looking at the computer, the last thing that I want to do is jump on a FaceTime with a friend and chat. So we were thinking through things that kids and teens could do to have stress relief and not be in front of our screen. So we won't go through all of these, but these are just some ideas that we had to get the right brain activating again and doing those creative and art stuff. So creative outlets like maybe getting on Pinterest and doing origami or building Legos if that's your jam. Families doing theme nights. I know at my house we do like a Taco Tuesday, and I look forward to it because that's, you know, I love tacos and I love queso. And so we've been going out and trying to get queso from different restaurants and support local, and that's something I look forward to. Family game night, creating games for families. Icecavation, that is a really fun one where you can take a toy and then you can freeze it, and then you could do it in a bowl and then take it out and then get a little hammer and then just chip away. And it's an easy one and it gets out some aggression, and it's a really fun one to do for kids. Kind of maybe switching to teens a little bit. I don't know about y'all, but I love mail. One of my biggest highlights of my day is going to my mailbox these days. And I have some friends, we just started doing a mail chain and maybe getting teens back into that. And maybe say, hey, how can you sit down and maybe think of someone you want to write a letter to? And maybe that could be something they could do that's not on a screen. Vision boards. So we're having a hard time traveling right now, but where do you want to go? Can we get some magazines? Can we just maybe draw it out and create a vision board of what we want next year to be like and some fun things? Maybe think of doing fantasy sports and creating some teams or learning a new skill or hobby. I learned how to make jam in my Instapot. That was my new hobby, and I was pretty proud of myself this year. Okay, so for the kids that are having a really tough time emotionally and they're kind of at their wits' end, this is a really easy thing to remember if you're working with children or just your own children. Usually when kids are having a hard time, they will either use their feet, their mouth, or their hands to let you know they're struggling, right? So we have 2-year-olds who are stomping on the ground, kids that are screaming at their parents, or kids that are so frustrated they just start clenching up their fists. So thinking through ways to help kids depending on what outlet you think that they need. So I really like the things that we listed, and I won't go through all of them, but I think it's a really good resource to kind of check in with yourself to see if a child's needing to move their body, what part of it, and these are some really great ideas of things that they can do. And I think they're all pretty self-explanatory of ideas. Okay, so the K of this presentation is know your limits. So I think this is a really good one to think about and to talk about, because as child life specialists, you're there for kids. You're creating a connection. They're telling you things. you may have your watchtower go up if certain things happen for kids. And this was created, I think, through Crystal Wilkins, one of our staff members, of the difference between the therapeutic play that we are skilled enough to give to kiddos and teens, and then the difference between like a mental health professional. So I like this one because I'm both, so I'm able to speak a little bit to both of these. So as we know, for child life, it's more directive. You're going to help a kid through a blood draw or something scary, and it's defined and short term by that illness, and then you can walk out of that room. You know, sometimes on hospitals, depending on what setting you're in, there's inconsistent relationships. You might just go meet a kiddo for outpatient, help them, and then never see them again. Or inpatient's a little bit different depending on your scenery of your hospital. So there are immediate issues of child life, and we're more preventative, and it's more an open format. Whereas mental health and RPT, they are dealing with more long-term things, defined by there's a problem, there's something we've identified that's a problem, and we need help with it, and we need to focus on that problem and figure out how the best way to attack it. So I usually explain this to parents when I'm working with people at Wonders and Worries. I say, hey, make sure your kid or teen knows they're not coming to Wonders and Worries because they've done anything wrong. You know, we are just here to be the extra added support group to them through your illness, and we just want to give them some extra tools and some coping ideas, and just to build a relationship that if anything shifts in your illness, we're here and they have someone to go to. Whereas therapy is more of, there's a problem and there's a behavior that needs to be shifted and changed, and we're going to make goals, and we're going to check in on a weekly basis, and we're going to work on them, and it's just a very different thing. So as we kind of shift a little bit, we'll think about, here we go, some of the signs of stress for children and teens. And the biggest thing that I think that I want everyone to take away from this slide is these are all normal reactions right now, living through a pandemic or through an illness. So we all know our child development. We all know these things were going to pop up. And the biggest thing that we're going to talk about right now with knowing your limit, there's two words, and that's going to be duration and intensity. So at what point, as a child life specialist, do you say, hey, this is outside of my skill set, this child's anxiety is off their radar, and I see it pop up with them when I'm with them, but they're telling me all these things about they sit down to eat and they can't eat, or they don't think they get sleep and they sit down and don't fall asleep for like 4 hours. So children can demonstrate some of these behaviors and feelings, and it's normal. However, complications, depending on the duration, the intensity, are what we're looking for, the signs and symptoms. And if those signs are impeding that child's ability to do their daily, even though right now our daily is a little bit different. Usually the examples I would use is if a teen is not going out with friends and staying at home, if they're not able to focus during their school and it's affecting their grades, if we have a smaller child who is like bedwetting and it's just happening every night instead of like once every other month, you know, maybe there's some things we can try, but if it's happening every night, then hey, that's an issue we probably need to look into that, and we probably should refer to a mental health professional to get some support for that. So I think with anxiety, we all have a little bit of it. It's all within us, but just helping identify for parents too, because I think a lot of parents might come to you because their kids are comfortable with you and go, hey, like, have you noticed? And then you might go, yeah, like in your brain, I have noticed, because you're super anxious, meaning your child's anxious too. Because usually if I have a kiddo that comes into my office and they're high anxiety, I always want to meet the parents as well, because typically they have a parent with high anxiety, and I have to help that parent manage their anxiety, so then therefore we can help coach their kiddo. So, okay. So these are the wonderful resources. The great video that Kim showed you on anxiety is linked for you here, as well as the kids version, which is also wonderful. And the Art with Heart book highly recommend it. There's some great activities in there that we like to use with kids and that you can adapt. And that first aid for feelings is an amazing resource for smaller children that I think that every parent should have, and it's downloadable. So great. Thanks, guys.
So Corinne, I'll also share on
Yeah.
those
You know
resources
what
that are on
anxiety
that.
feels like. We all do.
On that last resource slide, just so our listeners know, those will be in the resource document as well, those links. So just if you didn't get them right there, that's okay. They will be coming to you to be uploaded. I want to remind people we do have some more time. So if there's any questions, you can go ahead and type those to me, and I'll read those out loud. And Corinne, I'm so grateful that you covered the part about sort of what is like normal anxiety and worry and concern, and where do we draw that line? Because I feel over the years, I certainly have had that question. And I'm glad you defined it professionally so that we all can sort of look at that and think about that professionally and are practicing within our scope. But I also do know that parents have asked that question so many times, well, is that just normal? Or how do I know when it's normal and what is it not? Is there any more, like, I know you talked a little bit about that. Is there anything else that either one of you want to expand on that a little bit about helping parents assess what's normal? Because, I've got friends, professional calls, but also calls from friends saying, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if this is normal. Anything you guys want to add about that?
I can jump in first, Corinne, and then definitely add to that. But I think two things come to mind. One is spending that time with the parent to have them share with you things like, tell me what your instincts are telling you, and focusing on their child's temperament. When in some of the parenting classes that we teach here, we'll focus with parents on, just starting with that core piece of, what is your child's temperament in day-to-day? Do they tend to be a more anxious child on a day-to-day basis? And so in the midst of this pandemic, they're going to be probably a little more anxious than maybe the child next door. And so to help parents recognize that however your child is wired, whatever their temperament is, that will always be the case for them. And if they know that they have a child who does tend to be more anxious, the way I always think about it is, if they're able to, there's certainly nothing wrong with adding to their support team. And if that parent's instincts are telling them, I don't feel good about what's happening, like my child is really struggling, I'm really struggling, they're feeling overwhelmed, then just looking at, well, let's put these different pieces together. And there's certainly nothing wrong with, like Corinne was saying, kind of that experiment of let's add this additional piece. And then Corinne absolutely kind of, to me, hit one of the key pieces, and that is the parent's well-being. And anytime we're looking at what's happening with the child, we don't provide that direct support to parents, but we absolutely encourage that, or sometimes we'll just say that's what you need to do next before we continue to see your child. Your next step where you should put your energy is on support for you and helping to manage your anxiety, because until you're able to do that, your child is going to be reacting. And so we can guide parents in the parenting piece, but there are many times when we need to encourage that the parents get the support they need.
Yeah, Kim, I definitely, pointing out the parents' dysregulation. And a lot of times they don't want to hear that. And it's hard for them to hear that maybe their dysregulation is causing their child to be anxious. But I think it's a really important conversation to have. And I think one of the most wonderful ways that you can do that in a way that looks like collaborative is the stressors. These are my stressors, that little sheet that I showed. This is what it looks like, and this is my self-care. And everyone just sitting down as a family and talking through, when mommy is doing those fun poses, with someone showing her, that's mommy's self-care, like, I need that. What are you going to do today? And just doing as a family to help, ease anxiety and get our bodies moving, and just making it a collaborative event.
Great. Thank you for adding that additional information. I do think that point about the parents understanding their own children and what's normal for them, because I know I've so many times had to have conversations about, if the parent's like, oh, well, they don't come out of their room. Well, what is it normally like? Or, and helping them see what is the difference, and is it impacting their normal way of functioning, and is it impacting their day-to-day life, and those pieces that sometimes parents just don't think about. They're like, oh wait, oh yeah, that's different. So I think that's an important thing to help with the parent assessment too, and having sort of a realistic expectation as they're looking at their own child. So if there's questions, go ahead and type those in, but I do have a couple things I might just go ahead and post to y'all if you don't mind. So we've been talking a lot, and thank you both so much for sharing your clinical expertise. I could, like I said, I'm so grateful to be able to work with y'all and hear from you all the time. But one of the things I was thinking about is, what about sudden change, like sudden change in medical status, or what about helping children with that fear from in that moment, and the anxiety about what next? What about those kind of things? Any thoughts on sudden change, like in medical situations, or say someone's exposed to COVID and all of a sudden they have to quarantine suddenly? Because I think the more testing that's coming, people might test positive, not even know it, and then all of a sudden, boom, right? So any thoughts on that?
Yes, I can start, and again, Corinne, just jump in. I think that it can be really helpful to prepare for the unexpected, and to be talking, as families, talking with children about, this is our plan right now, but it may change at any moment, and some of those things, like the example that was on my mind, Missy, of like having to quarantine unexpectedly. So let's say a child starts to go back and return to in-person, just preparing for the possibility that that might change suddenly at any moment, where the school closes, or you can't go because you're exposed. And doing it in a way, again, that your child, and recognizing, like, how does my child process this information? And then also trusting that as we're helping to bolster all of these coping tools for children and parents, they have the ability to flex and change. They do have that within them. We want to provide structure and routine and try to help children, adapt, but they have the ability to cope with unexpected change, and so do parents. And so really just encouraging them and letting them and trusting themselves that there's so much that we don't know, but we will be able to cope with it, or we'll be able to take the steps to add to our toolkit if we need to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Kim, and Missy, maybe to piggyback a little bit off what Kim was sharing, I think that, the term flexibility, and that they do have the ability to, even though change is really tough, and especially if we're not prepared for it, I think that the parent's ability, or the caregiver, whoever is with those kids or teens, just being able to be honest with them and share their feelings, and to model, this sucks, like this is really tough and I'm not happy. I know today is going to be really tough because we have to figure out a new way of doing things, where you can't see your parent, and it just really stinks. And sitting in that loss with them and sharing and modeling that, and I think that's going to create that connection with that child, and helping them tell that part of the story, to create some meaning around it. Like, this is, why do we have to do this? Oh, that's right, because if dad comes home and he tests positive and grandma lives with us, and just helping walk through, because that limbic system is going to pop in and all the emotions are going to come out. But when they can go back online, you can just think through, okay, yeah, I know why that happened, and just walking them through that and being patient.
Thank you. I love that. I love that why piece of it, right? Because I think for any of us, if you understand the why, then hopefully it makes the what you have to do a little more bearable, right? So I think, and I love that part of that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. That made me think of just kind of going back to what I feel like are some of the basics that we do as child life specialists, but that opportunity for children to share, like, what are they wondering about? What are they worrying about? And I'm thinking about a little girl whose dad was hospitalized because of COVID, had been on a vent, and she was coping fairly well, but mom hadn't asked in a while, like, what was on her mind. And when she revisited that with her daughter just kind of made the statement, her daughter was 8 years old, said, well, when daddy dies, and she had just had in her mind that daddy would die. And that was a possibility, but there was also a lot of potential that he would survive, and he's surviving right now. So anyway, just kind of going back to the basics of remembering to always check in with any changes, just what is on the child's mind, what are their questions and concerns.
Great, thank you. I thought maybe it might be helpful is as y'all there in Wonders and Worries in our Central Texas area are continuing really to support children through this pandemic in a different way. What are you seeing? Are there any things that you guys are noticing as children are starting to go back to school in some fashion? So how have things shifted or changed and looked a little bit different, the way maybe you're delivering services or the interactions you're having with the children as they sort of navigate that?
Yes, so I will say, I'll just speak for me, Corinne can speak for her. There is, we're experiencing maybe some heightened stress, heightened anxiety around how will we be able to support children, because we've been doing so through a screen virtually throughout, the spring and the summer, but school in the spring was very different than it is now, or what we're seeing in Texas. Most of the schools who are teaching online are following a bell schedule, and so children at home are still needing to plug in to classes live with the teacher throughout the day, and so it doesn't leave a lot of opportunity for us to meet with them virtually. And of course, we all know at the end of the day, when a child's been in front of a computer for 7 hours or intermittently, we don't want them to have to sit in front of a computer again for our session with them. And so right now we're just kind of waiting and trial and error. We're kind of trying to figure out how can we continue to see children and support them without overloading them with the screen time piece. And I think what we'll find is it will just get creative like we always do, and individualize as much as we can while still really honoring our own self-care and our staff self-care. I have the privilege of supervising a lot of our staff, and what I don't want to have happen is that staff are having these really long days where they're seeing kiddos into the evening hours and not being able to do what they need to do for themselves. So, and we do have staff who offer support on the weekends. So for some families that might be a good solution, but for others that might not be a good solution. So the answer is we're not really sure right now what that's going to look like, but we do trust that we will be able to figure it out and just keep experimenting.
Yeah, Missy, I think what I'm noticing with a lot of my clients right now is just the desire to go back to school. If they're done with their home, they want out of the environment, they want to see people, but they know that for some of them and most of them, because they have an immunosuppressed parent, that it's just not possible. And just the loss of like, when are we going to go back to normal? And that anxiety kicks in, thinking through like family dynamics. I had one client who, the parents are working all the time throughout the day, even though they're home, and then they go into dinner and she just wants to, talk about all of her issues, all of her problems, but they needed decompression time. They needed time on their phone and to scroll through news. And then a big blow up happened because she was like, "You're not paying attention to me." And she went limbic and got really mad. And I said, let's take a step back and think through like why they needed that. Oh, well, yeah, I can see maybe why they wanted to like scroll on their phone and like just have some me time. So I think it's just trying to figure out routines. How can they be social and not be on video games all the time, but still have video games because that's the only way that they can, talk with people. But then having a sleep schedule. I think sleep right now for a lot of parents shifting in from summertime to school and walking through trying to create a routine of being on a sleep schedule has been an ongoing conversation I've had with a lot of parents this past couple weeks.
Great. Thank you all so much. When I sit and I think about, when we think about the children we at Wonders and Worries work with, but then also our listeners, like all the families that they're interacting with, they have all of that medical illness related stress to cope with. And now with the pandemic and now with the return to school, it's just got to be so overwhelming. So I appreciate all that you both have shared with us today. Hopefully the listeners can take away some tools and ideas, and remembering to always like sort of assess and figure out where they are and help children and families move forward. So I appreciate both of you, Kim and Corinne. Wonderful, wonderful job, and thank you for sharing all this information with us. Thank you to our listeners for joining us today. Our next Wonder Chat will be on September 18th, and we're going to dive in, we're going to shift gears a little bit from the pandemic itself and really just look at the impact of an adult's illness on children. You know, that's what we do at Wonders and Worries, and that is our primary focus population. And we really want to be able to look at that. So Kathleen McHugh and I are going to have a conversation. Some things may be a review regarding what those impacts might be for some listeners, but I thought it would be a great way to hear from Kathleen, an expert in this topic, and we're just going to kind of share that information with a little bit of a different slant. So we hope that you will put that on your calendar and join us. And like I said, when you leave this meeting, you should get the evaluation. I hope you'll complete that for us. If you do need PDU credit and would like to purchase the post-assessment in order to get that credit, you can use this QR code that's on the screen right now, or you can get that on our website, and the link will also be in the email that comes to you tomorrow. I hope you all are well, and we hope to see you next month for our Wonder Chat. Thanks for joining us.